And last fall, after the hurricane, 3 Texas churches sued FEMA, challenging FEMA's policy of prohibiting religious uses of certain disaster funds. The churches asked the court to require that FEMA include these churches in the program and allow the churches to apply for federal funds to rebuild their sanctuaries that had been damaged in the floods. Now, this had been a long-standing policy that FEMA had, but as I said, these churches sued, and right after the lawsuit was filed, President Trump tweeted his support of the lawsuit. The government then, that was the defendant in the case, asked the judge to dismiss the lawsuit because it said FEMA was planning to change its policy to allow churches to apply for funds to get taxpayer monies to rebuild the sanctuaries. United stepped in and wrote a brief in the lower court, the district court's case, that was joined by several other allied organizations. And the judge ruled in our favor. Then, when the other side, the plaintiffs, the churches, appealed the case to the Fifth Circuit, Americans United again wrote and filed a brief, again joined by other organizations in the Fifth Circuit, which also led to the case being affirmed, the district court's ruling in our favor being affirmed. Now, of course, things have happened. FEMA did go ahead and change its policy. So now that these churches are allowed to at least apply for grants, and Americans United will be watching to see what happens. But again, these are 2 examples of situations where we at Americans United were looked to by others for our guidance and our expertise on this issue. Now, we have an interesting program for you tonight, but first, we have to take care of business. We have a short business meeting, so we here can report to you what our chapter has been doing over the last year and elect a new board of directors to take us into the next year. Now, first, keep in mind that Americans United has a highly respected professional staff in Washington, D.C. The reason I just looked around is because I have in the back with me, I brought with me a copy of our monthly magazine that shows our new executive director on the cover. If you haven't seen it yet, her name is Rachel Lazar. She's the first female and the first non-Christian to helm Americans United. And having had the opportunity to meet her because I serve on the national board, I can tell you she's great and the staff loves her. She's already making a lot of wonderful changes. But our chapter's work here in Houston is led entirely by volunteers. This evening has been made possible by volunteers. Everything that I'm about to tell you about has been done by volunteers. So keep that in mind when I tell you what we've done in the last year. Now, for most of the last year, our chapter has focused on the Johnson Amendment, and we've engaged in an education and activism campaign focused on that. Who knows what the Johnson Amendment is? Okay, there are a few of you who aren't on our board who know what it is. Well, how many people know, do you know whether houses of worship and other nonprofits are allowed to endorse or oppose political candidates if they want to maintain their tax exemption? Does anybody know the answer to that? No? No, they're not. Okay, I see more of your heads saying no, they're not. All right, well, that's what the Johnson Amendment's about. It's kind of like when a lot of people said they couldn't stand Obamacare, but they liked the Affordable Care Act. You remember the polls that showed that? Okay, so people may not know what the Johnson Amendment is, and so they're not sure if they're for or against it. But when we explain to them what it is, hopefully you agree with us how important it is. The Johnson Amendment is a federal tax code provision that bars 501c3 organizations, which are nonprofits like Americans United, like houses of worship, from endorsing or opposing political candidates if they want to maintain their tax exemption. Now, nothing stops a church or mosque from endorsing a candidate. They just risk losing their tax exempt status, that's all. And so most of them, of course, probably all of them see the benefit of maintaining that tax exempt status, part of which is so that donations to that organization are tax deductible to the donor. This is called the Johnson Amendment simply because Lyndon Baines Johnson, when he was Senate Minority Leader back in 1954, remember I said minority leader, Republicans were in control of Congress back then as well as the White House. He introduced this, it passed with little discussion, and it's remained on the books for over 50 years. Well, what's the problem? Donald Trump, before he was elected and after he was elected, vowed to totally destroy the Johnson Amendment. So, Americans United has been out front fighting that effort because we know that the Johnson Amendment is important. We know that most Americans, not just people in this room, but most Americans support it. Most Americans don't want their houses of worship to be tainted by this. The panelists that we have with us tonight, I'm sure will talk about that and explain to you their concerns about repealing the Johnson Amendment. There's some other problems with it, some concerns we have, such as how it will affect our campaign finance system and the integrity of elections. When people are basically allowed to funnel campaign contributions through a house of worship. Because right now, campaign contribution is not tax exempt or tax deductible. And depending on the organization that you donate your money to, it may or may not be anonymous or public. However, if someone is allowed to donate money to a house of worship or another nonprofit that in turn gives that money to or supports a particular political candidate, well, that means that the donations to support the political candidate are anonymous and tax deductible. So again, it's perverting our campaign system, adding to something that some people call dark money. Another thing that led our chapter to get involved in this is 2 Houston area congressmen have been very involved in repealing or trying to repeal or weaken the Johnson Amendment. Kevin Brady and John Culberson both proposed measures during this legislative session to either reduce or eliminate funding to enforce the Johnson Amendment or to totally repeal it. Now again, we as Americans United, we are tax exempt. We cannot endorse or oppose candidates. However, we, like faith leaders, like leaders of other nonprofits, can talk about issues. And that's what I'm doing tonight, talking about this issue that's very important to me and to us. So, what have we done as a chapter to support the Johnson Amendment and to ask others to help us oppose the repeal? Well, if you look at email from us, if you're on our email list, we have talked about this issue in almost every message that we've sent over the last few months. We have emailed out and posted action alerts asking you to contact your representatives, your federal representatives, and ask them to keep the Johnson Amendment in place. We've contacted faith leaders and asked them to call, in their capacity as faith leaders, to call Congress and let them know how they feel about it, and to sign a letter that Americans United has crafted that was sent to Congress, and we're still accepting signatures. But it was a letter for Congress from faith leaders saying no, they, the faith leaders, oppose any efforts to damage or repeal the Johnson Amendment. We've given presentations at congregations and other organizations about the Johnson Amendment. We've contacted other nonprofit groups to work with us. We even visited Representative Culberson's office and had a very nice visit, sincerely, had a nice visit with his legislative assistant about this. And we dropped off literature at the office of Senator Cornyn because neither he nor Senator Cruz would leave us in person, so at least we're able to leave Senator Cornyn some literature about it. Now, we plan to continue these efforts. Just last weekend, you might have heard, especially if you look at our Facebook page, that Mike Pence said that the Trump administration is going to continue its efforts to repeal the Johnson Amendment, and until it succeeds, the government simply will not enforce it. So, we're going to continue this effort, and we hope you'll join with us. In a minute, I'll talk about how you can do that. Also, since our last meeting, our last annual meeting, our Houston chapter hosted a public event. I hope some of you came to that, and an intimate gathering of faith leaders for Reverend Barry Lynn, our executive director, who was retiring after 25 years at our helm. And we co-sponsored the Houston Women's March of 2018. Now, I want to recognize in particular our board of directors for all the work that they've done, and I'll just go in the direction I see that Matt Sharp, Maya Asomsky, Bobby Cohen, Life Hatlin, Mary Beth Davis is standing up over there. Justin Schweitzer can't be here tonight. Al Khan is somewhere around. He was standing outside. Some of you may have met him. And now it's time to elect our new board of directors. If you think we're doing a good job, some of us are up for re-election. You might want to vote first. If you think not, well, feel free to find someone or nominate someone else. But I want to call right now on George Talashay, he's nominations committee chair, to present the slate. While he's coming up, I'll tell you, George is somebody who came to our organization a month or so after the last presidential election He was all fired up. He was wanting something to do something. He became very involved in our organization. He's now on the nominations committee. Well, he is the nominations committee chair. He's been partnering with Maida Osofsky to organize and oversee our Johnson Amendment effort. So that's an example of somebody who's really gotten involved, and we've come to rely on George a lot.
Hello, and thank you for coming to support Americans United. Our proposed board for the coming year, the nominated people are me, George Talashe, Dinesh Singhal, Bobby Cohen, who is nominated to be the treasurer, Maida Osofsky, who's nominated to be the vice president, Justin Schweitzer, who's nominated to be the secretary, Barry Beth Davis, Nancy Friedman, who's nominated to be the president, and Al Khan. Do I hear any nominations from the floor? Do I hear a motion to approve? Do I hear a second? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Thank you very much.
George just pulled a maneuver that I like to refer to as the Dick Cheney maneuver. Does anybody know that reference? Other board members have done that in the past too. Dick Cheney, you might remember, headed the search committee for President Bush's vice presidential nominee. And again, George is not the first AU board member to do that, but I've been pleased when the nominations committee did that in the past, and I'm very pleased that George is going to be joining our board. Now, we've done a lot, but we could do more. We could be stronger and louder if we have help from more of you. You know, a lot of you have told me how important this issue is to you, but you can join us. And some of these ways I'm about to suggest don't cost any money. I want to run through them quickly because I know we want to get to this great program, but these are important. It's one of the ways you can help is by learning. That's what we're going to do tonight. Another way is by acting. Another way is sharing, and finally giving. So let me touch on quickly on a few ways that you can all help do any of those things. Learning. Watch for our monthly email messages. If you don't get them, talk to us. Maybe they're in your junk mail folder if you've already signed up on our list and you haven't been seeing them. Maybe they're in your junk mail or spam folder, whatever. Talk to us and we'll help work it out. Al Khan is our membership chair. If you want to catch him tonight or just contact us later, we will work with you to make sure you get our emails. Come to a monthly board meeting. We put the monthly board meeting date and time on our website, and we put it in every monthly message that we send out. We invite all of our members to come and see what we're doing. Pick up some of our literature. We have literature at the back. Talk to one of us board members. You now know who we are. Ask us questions. Go to our website. Go to the national organization's website. Sign up on the national website. That's different from our chapter's email list. Sign up on the national website for their email list to get action alerts and press releases that the national organization sends out. Read our monthly magazine, Church and State, online. If you're a member, you get it in the mail. If you aren't, it's a great magazine. You can go and read it for free on AU's website. And if you're a social media user, both our chapter and the national organization have all the things that you might want. Facebook, Twitter, our chapter has a meetup page, and YouTube. Share what we publish. And there's a meeting like this tonight, share it with your friends. Some of you have brought friends. I'm really happy that you've done that, but you know, every time there's something going on, please share it with other people so they know about it. If you belong to a club or group, or you're involved with a media outlet that invite speakers, invite us. Like I said, we've been trying to speak all over town about the Johnson Amendment. We've had people on the radio. One of our members was on the radio last night about this program and about the Johnson Amendment. Others of us have spoken about it. We need to get the word out. So think about it. We can talk about the Johnson Amendment or any other aspect of this issue that your group would like to hear. Volunteer with us. Now you can give as much time as you have, as much time as you want to. You can help us in your own home. You can use your computer. You can use your phone. You never have to venture out of your house if you don't want to help us out. There are things you can do if you want to interact with us in person. But there are also things you could do from your own home. Frequently we put in our monthly messages volunteer opportunities, so check that out too. And finally, I refer to giving, and this is important. I know there are a lot of great organizations out there, but if you are a current member of Americans United, please keep your membership current. look for the reminder, the annual renewal reminder from the national office. I promise you, they will remind you. You just have to be on the lookout for them. And if you aren't a current member, please consider becoming one. It's only $35 a year. It is tax deductible, although I don't know if the tax code, if we're all going to be able to deduct our donations anymore, but it is tax deductible. And even for students, it's actually free. So if you want more about that, we can talk to you about that. If you're a member of the chapter, you automatically are a member of the national organization and vice versa. But we do ask that if you join, that you join for our website. It benefits us, it benefits you. I can explain why later, but we'd encourage you to go to our website, auhouston.org, and join. And basically, I'm sure there are some other ways you can think that I haven't, but we do welcome your help, we welcome your participation, we welcome your financial support, because as I said, the louder we are and the stronger we are, the more of those people out there who agree with us will join. The stronger and louder our voices will be to those who are elected officials who make the decisions. Now, let's get on to the interesting part of the program. Many people think only about how government's actions affect individuals, and indeed Americans United represents individuals who have been harmed by the government's trying to impose one set of religious beliefs over another. For example, right now Americans United is representing 3 Notre Dame University female students, and one of the cases that's been filed over the Affordable Care Act's contraceptive mandate regulations. In fact, I think we're the only lawsuit where 3 women who would be affected are involved. The other lawsuits are all filed by companies, corporations, universities, etc. So we represent 3 women who will personally be affected. And also we represent 6 United States citizens or lawful permanent residents whose relatives would be blocked from coming to the United States if the Muslim ban were implemented. A judge has blocked that, but if it were implemented, their relatives would be blocked from visiting them. So again, another incidence of people being involved, people being personally harmed by some of what the government has been trying to do in the name of religion. But people don't often think about how houses of worship and faith leaders are affected by efforts to tear down or weaken the wall. They don't think about how houses of worship and faith leaders are protected from being controlled by governmental interference or partisan politics. Well, tonight's program focuses on that aspect of Americans United's work. And even though that aspect of our work doesn't necessarily get the same attention as other things that we do, it's just as important. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Maida Asofsky so she can make the introductions.
Actually, I'm only going to make one introduction. I'm going to hand the rest of the program over to our panel. Just an aside, if there are any observant Muslims in the group, we have set aside a place for you to pray quietly in meeting room A, which is right across the hall. Now you know I'm Maida Asofsky, and I'm a board member here of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. It's my honor to start the evening by introducing Evan Mintz, our moderator. I'd like to say I've known Evan since he was born, but that's not true. I knew about him when he was in high school at St. John's right here in Houston. His father and my husband are tax lawyers and colleagues and friends. What I learned about him then is that he's congenitally opinionated. I didn't warn you about it. I heard of him again when I worked at the ACLU of Texas and worked with a number of very bright students at Rice. He was at the time the executive editor of the Rice Thresher and much admired, at least among the kind of students who found their way to the ACLU. Very opinionated was how his Rice colleagues described him. We finally met when he was at Cardozo Law School, and he applied for an internship in the Houston office of the ACLU. That was me, and I hired him. He returned to Houston after law school, and while I can't describe his journey to the Houston Chronicle, you should know that he was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for an editorial he wrote with Joe Hawley on guns and gun culture in Texas. He's now the deputy opinion editor of the Houston Chronicle. I give you tonight our moderator, Evan Mintz.
Thank you, Maida, for that very kind introduction. I'm positively blushing. I wanted to also thank you for inviting me to moderate this panel. I think growing up in Houston, sort of a blueberry in a red state, you really understand the pressure that happens between church and state, and it's something that becomes palpable. And there's this kind of cliche that, church and state is something that's only supported by these institutions that are secular. And what we learned tonight is that that's simply not true. It's a thing that serves religious institutions as well. I wanted to introduce our illustrious panel. First we have Rabbi Stephen Morgan. He's the rabbi at Congregation Beth Yeshurun. He's on the board of Interfaith Ministries of Houston. He also has a law degree from the UCLA School of Law. We also have Reverend Lisa Hunt. She's the rector at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, and she's also the vice president of the Faith Leaders Coalition of Greater Houston. And Mustafa Carroll is the executive director of the Texas branch of the Council on American Islamic Relations. And he began his civil rights activism at the young age of 16, something I sympathize with, as the president of the NAACP Youth Council in his hometown of Gary, Indiana. So I suppose the first question is, why is the separation of church and state so important, specifically from a religious perspective, people who are involved in that community? Rabbi Morgan, why don't you start, and we'll work our way down the panel.
Let's see, does this microphone work? Okay.
Yes.
Well, so first of all, as one of the minority religions in the country, I think it's pretty safe to say it's important to Jewish people that we have a separation of church and state in this country. Should I give a couple examples?
Please do, yeah.
Okay. So, two examples. One of them is about teaching creationism in public high schools. So, I'm a conservative Jew. In the sort of spectrum of Judaism, Orthodoxy tends to be sort of more fundamentalist. Reform Judaism is the sort of at the liberal end, and conservative Judaism is in the middle. I find it disturbing that we would want to put religion into our science school books, science textbooks. First of all, I happen to believe that the universe was created, but the way I understand how that happened is my business and how I explain it to my congregants. And I don't want a teacher in a high school trying to explain my understanding of how that works, and especially not when they're teaching biology, when they should be teaching the theory of evolution, which explains biology as we understand it today. So that's the first thing. Second thing is the example of abortions. In the Jewish tradition, of course, Jews argue about everything, so we argue about stuff too. But it's fair to say that the overwhelming majority of Jews understand that human life actually begins at birth, which is contrary to the view of other religions. And I can explain that in two texts, one that Christians will recognize and one that only Jews would recognize. So there's a story that's told in the Bible. It's a really odd story, but the Bible's full of very odd stories. So the story is told of two men who are fighting, and they're hitting each other and beating each other up. And I'm not making this up, it's actually in the Bible. There happens to be a pregnant woman standing near them. And accidentally, I'm not kidding, accidentally, this is what the Bible says, one of them hits the pregnant woman and she miscarries. Okay, so then the Bible says, what happens in a case like that? So in a case like that, if there is, quote, no other damage, the man pays a fine. Of course, it was a patriarchal world back then. He pays the fine to the prospective father. But that was a patriarchal world that existed at the time. However, if the woman is otherwise injured, then he has to pay her a certain amount of damages for her injury. But note it doesn't say that he's executed because he killed a human life. And then the text goes on to say, but in other cases, it's life for life, tooth for tooth, and the other aspects that people know. So the Bible's pretty clear that a miscarriage is not homicide. I mean, it couldn't be clearer. The Mishnah, which is a Jewish text of law that's from the 2nd century that interprets how we understand law, gives an important case. If a woman is pregnant and her life is being threatened by the pregnancy, then you are supposed to terminate the pregnancy, and then it goes on to be fairly graphic and descriptive, and says even if you have to tear the fetus limb from limb in order to save her life. And so again, her life is a human life, the other infant is not. And then once the infant is sort of halfway out, the Mishnah says, well then it's 2 human beings, and then you can't make a decision about which life is more important. So I mentioned this because it was a famous case in New York. I was also a lawyer, so the famous case in New York. They made a TV docudrama out of it called Total Strangers. A woman was in a car accident, she was pregnant. As a result of the injury, she was in a coma in the hospital. Her husband was told by the doctors that if they terminated the pregnancy, she had a better chance of getting out of the coma. He said, sure, do it, but before they could actually perform, this is unbelievable, but it really happened. Before they could actually terminate the pregnancy, 2 totally unrelated strangers went to a judge in the District Court of New York, where they knew they could get a favorable opinion. They got a TRO, a temporary restraining order, to prevent the doctors from terminating the pregnancy. It took several months for the husband to fight the suit until he won. And they terminated the pregnancy, but in the meantime, the woman's brain was severely damaged because of coma, and it didn't end well. Yeah, and to top it all off, the couple was Jewish. Had they gone to the rabbi would have demanded that they do the abortion under Jewish law.
Thank you.
So the Christian tradition has a checkered history of establishment and disestablishment. I'm an Episcopalian, and we come out of establishment. The Church of England as the established faith within the British realm. Those of you who are students of British history know how well that worked out. Coming to this country, the Episcopal Church was the established church in Virginia and many of the southern colonies. And what we came to realize as Episcopalians was that our churches were not necessarily strong as a result of being established. Tax dollars that were used to support life and ministry didn't bring vitality to Christian community. And minorities were oppressed. So the disestablishment of religion and that separation in my own Christian tradition has been important for the vitality of our own thinking, our own civic engagement, and our own religious life. The other thing that as a Christian minister I know, and as a student of our own history, is that Christians are often not very nice to each other, let alone to other religions. So as an Episcopal priest who's been very supportive of LGBTQ rights, for example, there are Episcopalians that would disagree with our interpretation, and we've had great differences in our communion around the acceptable place of LGBTQ folks. And that has led us to also blur the lines between church and state as we think about civil rights for LGBTQ people, as we've seen in this week's Supreme Court rulings. I think the separation of church and state and the lack of establishment of religion allows us to live vitally in our faith, no matter what it is. And it keeps us having to choose and be conscious of our religious choices or our choice to not be religious at all. If it's imposed, we don't have to think about it. If it's told to us, we don't have to choose right action and ethical behavior according to our faith. So I think the freedom to be religious or not, the freedom to engage in a variety of religions makes for healthy practice of religion, as well as healthy citizenship.
Good evening. First, I'd just like to thank you all for having me. I never dreamed I would be on the panel talking about religious freedom. I came out of the Christian tradition at the age of probably 19 and 20. I converted to Islam. Come from a family of preachers. All of my great uncles, my brother after me was a chaplain in the Navy for 22 years. My two brothers after him, all deacons in their churches, etc. And so I kind of took this religious freedom issue for granted as a Christian. But for the last 17, 18 years post 9/11, we've been on the forefront, as the Muslim community has been on the forefront of religious freedom issues in quite the opposite way that people have been accusing us of bringing Sharia law to the country. So my interest in it has been paramount because they have said, well, the Muslims are coming and they're trying to bring Sharia law and your daughters are going to wear burqas and next thing you know, you're going to have to pray 5 times a day and so forth and so on. So we've had to go out, a lot of our people have been denouncing this issue forever, and I told them it's not necessary to denounce it because it doesn't make you look innocent, it only makes you look guilty. The other thing is that we believe in religious freedom. Our Quran says in chapter 2, verse 256, let there be no compulsion in religion. And the fact that you would even compel somebody to believe tells you that it's no longer a religion. That you cannot even compel your own children to believe, that it's something that each individual has to adopt, that our personal beliefs are something that's really more sacred than just somebody telling you how you should do it. And once you have to tell somebody how to do it outside of protecting their rights in terms of life and liberty and this type of thing, once you have to do that, then you're into another realm at all. Our interest, and I'm glad that Rabbi Morgan brought up some of these sticky wicket issues. In Islam, quiet is kept. You can have an abortion up to the first trimester. And after that, now of course we discourage abortion on all counts, but you can do it up to the first trimester, and after that, of course, we have a little bit of a religious difference. We were fortunate enough, in a very unfortunate circumstance, with the Pulse nightclub killing back a couple of years ago. We were fortunate to be able to build relationships with the LGBT community. And after that happened, we actually organized a press conference at the Montrose Center and stood with their right to exist and to live and have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Now that doesn't mean that because of that we agree with the lifestyle itself, but we agree with the fact that they have a right to their own belief systems and their own rights to live and to let live, etc. And I will always stand with them in terms of that. There are some things that I cannot do, even religiously, but this is where we get into sticky wicket issues. Now, beyond that, we believe in the separation of church and state simply for the fact that if there's no other reason, that we're living in a pluralistic society and that this country was founded on that principle of religious freedom. And that religious freedom is afforded all of us based on the fact that we don't have a government-sponsored religion. And that if we do blur the lines, if we do agree to get rid of the Johnson Amendment, it is very, very certain that at some point that line will be not a blur anymore, that it will be an absolute. One of the things that I was fortunate to be part of, I was at the state capitol for an interfaith prayer service. We were praying at one end, this was just a few years ago before we had the open carry thing. and it was ironic that we were praying for the safety and security of the nation and for people to love and help each other. At the other end of the sidewalk near Congress was the open carry advocates, going to the Capitol trying to get open carry and so forth and so on. And I wasn't alert at the time, because had I been thinking, I'd have said, let me call some of these Muslims down here and join the crowd and tell them, yes, we're for open carry too, and throw some C4 on top of it, you know. And I bet you we would have defeated that measure. So you know, but it gets into another, it's the same thing. If we join the Johnson Amendment, I bet you we could change Trump's mind about wanting to have it. So, you know, it's a very important issue that we maintain this separation of church and state, and that we actually work towards having a more pluralistic thinking in our society.
Thank you. And you started talking about the Johnson Amendment. I want to hear from everyone else your thoughts on it. You know, Reverend Hunt, why is it so important to maintain this in law? And what are your fears of happening if we don't?
I think this is really critical, the existence of the Johnson Amendment. I think that one of the things that is blurred as we talk about the role of faith is in our public life is the leaders and policy, and people collapse. Things become so personalized, we think that we can't talk about issues from a faith perspective. And that's not what the separation of church and state would imply. Clearly, our moral life and our moral fabric and our conscience informs how we feel about abortion, what we think about health care for all, how we view public education as a good. The separation of church and state has never implied that we don't care about policy and how we come to decide what is the common good in our country. The gift of the Johnson Amendment is it keeps us from personalizing it to candidates and parties and allowing religious institutions to be focused on individual candidates. So we can come together as people of faith to agree or disagree on particular public policy issues and where we may be, but that's a different thing than telling you who to vote for. And you need, as citizens, to be able to have the freedom to vote. In the state of Texas, fewer than 13, at our last election, only 13% of the electorate participated in the election. We have a shameful participation rate in our democracy in the state of Texas. I think that the engagement in our public life, our common life, voting is really important for people of faith and no faith to exercise. But that is a different thing. Civic engagement is a different thing than my telling you who to vote for and my allowing you to collect money through my house of worship to be channeled. I think that the Johnson Amendment, and I've witnessed this in Houston, of religious leaders coming together to engage political leaders of a given party for financial contributions without balancing views. And it was done shamelessly, and I was really surprised at how blatant it was. My concern, if the Johnson Amendment is repealed, is that there will be opportunity and norms changed where people will be able to use houses of worship as channels for campaign financing and dark money. And they will have the cloak of religious liberty to wrap themselves around that kind of manipulation of our democratic process. I think this rule doesn't keep clergy from having moral convictions to be able to preach out of those moral convictions on public policy, and we do. And we can engage in differences of opinion about public policy with our parishioners and congregants. But to allow the government through this, through taxation and the fear of repeal of the tax exemption is really a blunt instrument to try to manipulate outcomes, political outcomes. And I think that the public financing of our elections is already woeful. Our participation in our democracy is woeful. And I think that we will be on the path to further destruction and lack of credibility in our electoral process, which will fundamentally change the way we are and who we are as people.
So I agree also. I'm opposed to eliminating the Johnson Amendment for the reasons already mentioned. And I was as you were talking, I was trying to imagine what it would be like if every single church, synagogue, and mosque and temple in the country decided to advocate for a particular candidate. What kind of a horrible political environment that would create for all of us. I mean, the country is already so divisive about everything. Can you imagine if churches started putting out placards, or synagogues put out placards, vote for this candidate in front of their lawns, and people are known for advocating on that? I just think it would be a total disaster and corrosive for the religions and corrosive for politics. And I can't imagine eliminating this.
Thank you. One of the issues that's been making headlines recently is the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. If anyone knows about that, as an instance where a cake shop refused to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. Now, the results of that case aside, it does bring up an instance where people's earnest religious beliefs, whether in this case they're bad actors or not, come into conflict with civil society. What is the right way to walk that tightrope? If we have a wall between church and state, but we have to live in a secular society, how do you find that balance? What advice do you give? What is it that you do when you're confronted by these questions? Mustafa, why don't you start us off?
You would ask me that. That is really one of those sticky, wicked issues that we talk about. But let's just go back and look at our history. There was a time when, interracial marriage was banned, that people probably wouldn't have baked the cake for a white and a black couple. Right now, we have the Muslim ban, but we also have these Muslim-free gun shops that won't sell to Muslims. This is going on right now as we speak. That we've had to file suit and in some cases send, types of lawsuits against certain establishments. I think when you start going down that road, it can be really tough. It's a real tough road, because if somebody's belief tells them, it's like, in this society, there's nothing I can't do. In fact, America is the best place in the world to actually practice your religion. Okay, there's absolutely nothing in this society that prevents me from practicing my faith. But there is this intersection where we will collide, inevitably, that depending on our understanding of our faith and our traditions, what we will do. Now, personally, I don't see an issue why you shouldn't just go and bake the cake and let these people go about their way. But people interpret things differently, and they see it differently, and they feel like they're endorsing gay marriage or whatever you want to call it. And so therefore they do these types of things. The same thing if people biblically thought that, there was some biblical support for not having interracial marriage, that there were people that believe that. There are people who believe that today. And so therefore they wouldn't have done X, Y, Z. There were people who wouldn't support Jewish weddings. I mean, the beat goes on. So we have to be clear, and it's up to us to educate people in terms of what it means to have civil rights in this country. What does it mean? Does it mean that you agree with every single thing that a person believes? No. But it does say that we agree to live civilly and to let everyone to live their life and to be open as much as humanly possible. I don't know that we will ever not have some type of prejudice that is rooted in some type of faith-based whatever, But we have to fight with ourselves to understand, to have a better understanding of our faith. Because as I said before, there's no compulsion in our religion, which means there's no compulsion for anybody to follow. I can't dictate to you that in a few minutes I'm going to have to break my fast and you have to come pray with me. There's no compulsion for that, and we should look at that in similar fashion when we're dealing with some of these other issues.
All right, thank you. Rabbi Morris, why don't you go next?
I agree. The case with the baker, I suppose, is a little bit complicated, but we did have restaurants that refused to serve blacks, and we decided in the civil rights movement that was just not going to be acceptable. If you open your business open to the public, you have to be open to the public, and you have to serve everybody. And that's a different statement from saying that an imam or a minister or a rabbi has to perform a wedding for a same-sex couple. If your religious belief doesn't believe, if your religion, if the way you interpret religion says you can't do that, you can't be compelled to do that, but that's different. Or that a synagogue should, or a church should host a wedding like that. Our synagogue does, in fact, and I did perform a same-sex marriage myself, but some synagogues don't. And that's a matter of religious belief. But when you're open to the public, like a restaurant or a baker, in my opinion, then you're open to the public, and you have to accept. You can't be discriminatory.
I think that this is a really live issue in Houston, Texas, right? I mean, we had very deep divisions of opinion around the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance, and there were bitter divisions in families and in the community as we were dealing with this issue, and didn't really come to a common mind. Our elected leaders took one position, and then the religious community organized in opposition to what civil rights would look like, and for whom. I think that the hero was really an interesting case of how we define civil rights and for whom. So I think that it's human nature that we're always going to have prejudice, as Mustafa said. There's always going to be an ick factor for somebody. And I think LGBT folks have elicited ick factor for a lot of religious people. But the truth is, they are citizens of our country. And citizenship is a different thing than a status in a religious context. And so I think that it's really critical that the dignity, from a religious perspective, that the dignity of every human being is honored because we're created in the image of God. That's a fundamental Christian teaching, as it would be in Judaism and Islam as well. But moreover, I think that the fact that marriage is defined as a sacrament in some religious traditions and is also a civil action in the United States, and that religious entities have been vehicles of the state in marriage has complicated this issue. So I think that being able to see the distinction between civil rights of marriage and religious rights of marriage, or privileges of marriage, because it's not a right within a religious context, is an important distinction. My own denomination, the Episcopal Church, had one of the biggest divisions we've ever had in this country around this very issue. So while we did not separate in the Civil War in our support of slavery, we kind of did a little sleight of hand to stay together around race, nominally. People left the Episcopal Church because we were moving for full inclusion of LGBT people, because they did not see that as a religious action and of God. In the Diocese of Texas, the way our church has coped with this is that no priest can be compelled to marry a gay couple, but neither can a congregation be denied the opportunity to offer that to gay couples. So communities are allowed, faith communities are allowed to discern with their clergy whether or not they will offer marriage to LGBTQ folks. And my congregation was the first in Houston in the Episcopal Church to do so. Religious people can have differences of opinion within the same faith. But I think that teasing out the difference between a sacrament and a civil right is an important exercise for us to be able to do, especially with the people we would consider icky.
The LGBT issues have provoked a lot of religious backlash. It's interesting, you went back through race, went back to the Civil War, and yet this is the thing that seems to be driving apart so many people. And there's a movement now among largely conservative religious institutions to say, we recognize this is the way that civil society is going. We do not want to be a part of that, and we want to withdraw. And they call it the Benedict option, as in Saint Benedict, who looked at Rome as a place sinful beyond repair and merely withdrew into nature. should religious institutions be looking at that as an option for dealing with the changing society? Should they think about withdrawing? Reverend, why don't you start us off?
So let's look at the shaker, shall we? I think that is the way of death. To withdraw is to limit our imaginations and our capacity to be creative together. And I also think that it's ironic that they've adopted Benedict as a model to call this effort, because the Benedictine order actually was a major source of the Renaissance and of being able to move into engagement of culture within Christian tradition. So the fact that they would take this on as a separatist agenda, I find amusing. I think that some people individually may feel the need to separate out, but I think to do that corporately or collectively is a mistake, especially as we're in a global world facing issues like climate change and what it means to be human on this planet together. It just seems to me that it robs our world community, our global community, of insight and an opportunity for renewal.
Mustafa, what do you think?
Well, you know, I think any type of separation from society is wrong. I don't think that it's a benefit for us to separate out. That's number one. Number one or number two. Number one is, if we look at our own tradition in Islam, the Prophet never separated out. And when he came about, he was born into a world that had 180, that actually worshipped 180 gods. It had all kinds of pagan things going on. It had all types of stuff happening and transformed that whole area. So that's our example. But aside from that, you know, if you think about what that means, and I think what happens even in a political way, I think a lot of people get so disgusted with the way that the politics are going in our country that the good people just self-segregate away from it because they don't want to be associated with it. And it leads it to people who may be less caring about other people. You know, we have in our society needs our example if we're living that example. You know, we can't play with it. If we're living the example that we say we are, then yes, it's going to be challenging. It's not supposed to be easy. I don't think that we can live in a society and say, well, we're going to go to the hills and let them go to hell. I think it's important for us to be there and to fight the good fight, because you know this place is just temporary anyway. If you're a believer, you're not going to be here forever. You know, our days are numbered here, but we should stay here and we should live the best life that we can and be an example. And if we're a good example of that, then maybe people will say, I wonder, you know, why they seem so civil? Why are they so good? Why do they do so much charitable work? Why do they tend to love the poor and help people and stuff like that? If all of those folks that claim that they carry the mantra of Islam or Judaism or Christianity, etc., were to just up and leave, it's like me leaving my family because my kids are acting up. You know, that's not the time to leave. You know, of course, I have thought about it. You know, there have been days where I had to get their baby pictures out and just, you know, look at that and remember when. But I can never leave them no matter what. Because without me there, they don't see my example. They don't see, you know, what I'm doing, and you know, how I treat their mother, how I treat them, my concern for the society, etc. Then where are we going? What's the purpose of faith anyway if that's how you're going to do it? You know, there's no purpose in it. You know, the devil is, and look, you're going to find the devil wherever you go. At first with you. So we need to be very conscious of any type of this separation from society is not an answer to our problems.
Thank you. Rabbi.
So I was going to say that we don't really have very many examples of hermits in the Jewish faith. But then I thought of one, and it's instructive, so I'll tell you the story is told in the Talmud about a rabbi who was so fed up with the society he lived in. It was during Roman persecutions and so on, and he and his son went into a cave and stayed there, it says, for several years. and they buried themselves up to their necks, and they didn't eat and drink anything, whatever. Miraculously, they survived, whatever. This is a story that's told in the Talmud. I'm not telling you it's historically accurate. The point is, they come out of the cave at some point, and he gets so frustrated with the condition of the world again that it's just not operating the way God planned. And again, this is not historically accurate. The Talmud says wherever he turned his gaze, it was like he had Superman's laser vision, and he would burn whatever he saw to a crisp. Right? So he was burning up every place. And then God spoke to him and said, I didn't let you out of the cave to destroy my world. Go back to your cave. So, and I think that's the danger of religious extremism. They want to separate yourself from the world because they think you're so much better than everybody else. I think the lesson's pretty clear.
Well, thank you. I want to take the opportunity to take any questions from the audience. We have a wonderful panel. If there's anything that's on your mind that you want to ask, you just pick up your hand. Go right there.
Clear statement that I could repeat to people why, in particular, I mean, I can understand intuitively why minority religion like Islam that is would not want to establish religion, Christianity, in the United States. But I haven't heard, apart from the issue of vitality of the faith, why you wouldn't want Johnson shredded and established strong connection between church and state.
For those who didn't hear, I guess the question is, what is a real, succinct, straightforward reason why the separation of church and state is important, particularly for people who are in the majority religion? Reverend Hunt, why don't you start off?
I think in the current climate, why this is so important, and I think how it will be used, is as a channel for dark money. I think that you'll be able to give money to your church, and that money can be then channeled to a political party and person without any accountability to the public.
There are many people who think that's fine. So if I wanted to argue,
Then it doesn't become democracy, I would argue, but it becomes this hegemony. And I would also argue that not every Christian faith is equal. So people that are going to want to go down that road don't represent my Christian faith. And I don't want the government of the United States to be defining that for me. Because as Mustafa was saying, in Islam, so it is in Christian faith that you can't be dictated to that way. There's the faith of the baptized believers and the role of conscience. So I think this imposition of government authority over the individual Christian is also, it's not only corrosive to the democracy, it's corrosive to the individual Christian faith and conscience. So I think that would be the primary reason that I think. And also, we also have an example, and this people don't want to talk about, I'm loath to bring up, I think it's important. In Nazi Germany, the church was taken over by the state, and you were told who to vote for. And minority Christians were ostracized and killed along with Jews and LGBT folk and gypsies and others. And so the impulse of that hegemony of one religious, and the co-optation of religion by the government, I would like somebody to give me a historical example of where that ends well, particularly for minorities and people of individual conscience.
yeah, I don't think it's an issue for the minority, that everybody within the minority can understand that. But when I'm talking to the average majority religious person, what can I tell them about why they should be?
Because I think that affects their political choices too. This comes back to them.
Well, I don't want to speak for Mustafa, but he did kind of allude to this a minute ago, that the United States is one of the best countries in the world for Muslims. And you would think, why is that, since there's so many Muslim majority countries? But what I hear from a lot of Muslims who live in this country is, I can't do my religion in Saudi Arabia the way I want to do my religion. And so what I was going to start out by saying is about Israel, which is the only country in the world that's majority Jewish. And Israel has somewhat of a separation in that if you're Christian, you do family life cycle and religious functions under your religious auspices, and the same for Muslims. But if you're Jewish, you have to do it under the auspices of the Orthodox rabbin. I'm conservative, a lot of my colleagues are Reform. It's really bad for our colleagues in Israel. And I love Israel, it's another story, but I don't want to get into that, at least politics here, but I love Israel, but that's one of the issues I have with Israel, that the Orthodox have a monopoly on Judaism in the country.
All right, thank you. There's a question in the back, all the way.
Yes, I wanted to know about education and the role of religion in education, because even in the Jewish faith, I believe that the Orthodox were more in favor of having the wall being torn down, so to speak, where they would accept money. I don't know if this is true or if, but in terms of private education and religious education and government-sponsored education.
For those who couldn't hear, there's a question about the role of private schools, private religious schools, and their acceptance of taxpayer dollars, I think largely through vouchers or even possibly through tax savings accounts. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the latest thing now. You can use your 529 college savings accounts for private elementary and high schools. Yes, that's true. Though there are a lot of Jewish people who want to send their kids to a Jewish day school, and it's very expensive, and so they are looking for ways to get support for that. And that's a dicey proposition, I think, but it's one of those sticky wickets.
So as St. Stephen's has a day school that goes from pre-K through 8th grade. And so from, as the president of the school board, I can say that I can understand why people would want to have access to those 529 months to be able to pay for the tuition. However, I think it does blur the line of separation, and I'm not in favor of vouchers. I think it's a disinvestment in our public schools and allows a disinvestment in children across socioeconomic groups. So I think tax dollars belong in public schools, and that part of our choice in our observance is to be able to invest our own dollars in parochial schools. And if that is a value for the religious communities, then I think it's on us to help raise funds to help supplement scholarships for those children that can't afford to go to our schools.
And I think I'm in the same boat as Rabbi Morgan. Our community is, we have over 100 mosques and like at least 8 or 9 full-time Islamic schools. And I have known that there are people who are looking for vouchers, but it's strictly, part of it is an economic issue. The other underpinnings of the school vouchers is that the people have no faith in public school system, that they're afraid that their kids are going to get corrupted or whatever. You hear this
Government schools.
Yeah, what do they call them?
They call them government schools.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one, but yeah, that sounds right. Yeah. So the underpinnings of it is that with all the different things that are happening in the society socially, people are afraid that their children are going to get tainted by that. They're afraid of the drugs, they're afraid of LGBT, they're afraid of interracial stuff, they're afraid of gangs, they're afraid. The fear is driving a lot of people toward that direction in the economics. Because in our community, the Islamic education, the schools are fairly expensive. And so there are a lot of people who can't afford it. And the school itself can't afford to keep open without getting some supplemental money. But I agree with you that we should raise money because it is kind of fragmenting the public school system. I think, I came up in a public school. I'm not too bad off. All of our kids went to public schools. And I believe in the public school system because I have not seen, at least from my perspective, I have not seen, and I was an educator also, I have not seen a great difference or a great benefit. I think that whatever issues are there, that I'm glad that I sent my kids to a public school so they could learn the real world and how to deal with them and how to act despite that. My parents felt the same way. And I grew up in a place where drive-bys was popular before they got popular. But my folks believed that we could learn anywhere. They believed that you don't have to act like everybody else. Now, it was a challenge, but that was what happened. But I just wanted to share a few of the underpinnings of this, because it's not just economics, but it is a large economic issue.
Thank you.
Please, what you said was that people call these government schools, and folks don't seem to be able to make the connection that if the wall is not there, it goes both ways. So what ends up happening is that parochial schools are then government schools too.
I thought in Islam, the government and the church were intimately associated, such as the legal system was founded on not only the Quran, but the rest of the story.
Okay, I'm going to ask you this question, because I always ask the Muslims, tell me where this is going on, because we don't have a theocratic state in the world. Then we got one, Iran that claims it. We had the Sudan claimed it at one time, and Pakistan claims it. But if you talk to people in those areas, it's far from all of that. It's far from.
I didn't say the state. I said the religion.
Oh, the religion says what now? I'm misunderstanding.
States that practice the religion, Saudi Arabia.
I was in Saudi Arabia. I'm not sure how great of an example that is, but they do practice. The state does claim it. All right. Islam is, I mean, you know, it's so, I think that when we think about religion, and one of the things that I found, and I've been in 2 religions now, and one of the things I found, and I still stand by this, that unless the individual or unless the people adapted themselves, it's not really a religion. And that means that the state cannot own the religion. That's my point. The state cannot own it. And once the state owns it, now the state can own certain aspects of it, like you can't kill, rob, steal, and that type of thing. But when you absolutely own the mode with which people, how they worship, or if you compel people to pray at certain times, or compel them to have to dress a certain way, etc., it becomes really a sticky, wicked issue. Now, I'm not sure that I'm understanding your question exactly, because I see a question.
Well, if we go back to the foundation of Islam, it certainly was not that way at the time. The question is state intimately matched with religion?
No. During the time of Muhammad, Muhammad was persecuted. Meant to, if you look at the history, when he went to Medina and made the hijrah, he actually partnered. They actually developed a charter at Medina. Look that up. Google the charter at Medina, and it was okay. So it was a multi-religious and no religious state.
How about when he went back to Mexico?
All right, let's not get into a back and forth. People want questions, but I think we might be able to chat afterwards. In the blue shirt, I'm pointing right at you.
Blue shirt? You got a blue
Yeah.
Lawyer and 3 religious scholars, the state of Texas has Article 1, Section 4, which requires that any government official acknowledge a supreme being, not any particular religion, but they have to acknowledge a supreme being.
So the thoughts that the state requires elected officials to recognize a supreme being.
Absolutely. Elected officials. Article 1, Section 4, state constitution is supposed to parallel the First Amendment, but they added the requirement that any official has to acknowledge a supreme being. And the thoughts about that should be, or have been pointed out, saying, well, that person should have to be a person conscious, which is the difference.
You know, I have to say something on this one. How are they supposed to know that this person, he says or she says, I recognize the supreme being, or is it by their actions?
It has to be that they recognize the supreme being in us.
By saying it.
Right. Well,
okay, they can do everything else that shows that they don't.
This is more of a legal question than
You know, that's what gets me. I'm thinking, okay, where's that in the Constitution? That you have to recognize the supreme being?
Well, I think I could say, you know, as the lawyer up here, and maybe Rabbi can back me up, but that sounds unconstitutional facially.
Yes, absolutely.
And probably, you're waiting for, you gotta elect someone so they have standing so they can sue over this.
It has never been litigated. That's the only problem.
I'm looking forward to the suit.
But
I bet everyone in this room is.
if I just want to add one thing to what Mustafa said, which is a very interesting thing you said. Do they act like there's a supreme being? Because in the Bible, what I was thinking is when somebody's called a God-fearing person, you could check this out. I haven't found an exception to this. As far as I know, every time a person is considered God-fearing or not God-fearing, it's about how they behave.
Yeah.
It's whether they end up being good or not, right? And so, a God-fearing person, I mean, everybody except the Israelites at the time was pagan. Right? When they talk about pagans and say they didn't fear God, but I mean, what does that mean? They acted like, you know, horrible people. That's what it was referring to. Not what they actually believe.
And given that definition, there's a lot of pagans claiming to be.
Yeah, a lot of people should in Congress probably, yeah, but anyway.
Let's move on to a few more questions up in the front row.
It seems like it's the presence of isolated parishes and congregations. Because instead of choosing a certain synagogue because of the religion, you're choosing it because of what politics we have. And that would fragment parishes.
The question is asking whether the getting rid of the Johnson Amendment would split up already established religious institutions because it would cause fights within them. Do you have any thoughts on how that would go?
I agree, are you already? I think it would be very divisive within the congregations. I also think it puts religious leaders whose salaries are paid by their congregants in difficult positions as well, in terms of the way that we understand each other and the cohesion and trust. I think if it would also exacerbate, as the rabbi was talking about, we're already a very divided country, and I think people come to their house of worship to learn how to act right and to get practice in doing that with people that are different from them, but who share common convictions and are yearning to be better people.
Thank you.
Faith leaders don't get to exercise their rights as citizens. I kind of think that's a red herring, but everyone's counted as a citizen, not getting voters or whatever. So can you talk a little bit about what you get to do when you're not at the pulpit, you know, when you get to go home, and do you get the hard signs, and you get to vote? Because I don't think the rights are taken away from the individual faith leaders. Maybe that's
I don't know that there's anything that you can't do outside of that. I'm trying to understand how is that limiting you from being politically active, and I just haven't got it. There are so many other avenues besides getting up in the pulpit and asking for a candidate. And I haven't found it to be any disservice. I don't understand why they say that. I agree with you. I think it's a red herring. I don't see it.
I personally would probably very difficult for me to put a political candidate sign in front of my lawn because I have a mixed congregation. So,
Is that politically mixed?
yeah, politically mixed, right, yeah. So, obviously I can vote for whoever I want to, but I'm in a private conversation with somebody. I'm free to say what I believe, what I think. But I wouldn't go out and campaign for any particular person, even in my private time, although I suppose there's nothing to prohibit a clergy person from doing that. But Liz Johnson mentioned. He's not speaking from his pulpit in favor of a candidate. He's doing it in his private time as a citizen. It makes it clear I'm just campaigning as a private citizen, speaking for myself. I don't think that violates, my understanding is that does not violate the Johnson Amendment.
I do think that it's legitimate for clergy to be engaging candidates in conversation about where they stand on public policy issues. Because I think preaching around public policy issues from a light of faith makes a difference. And I think members of congregations are interested in that intersection of faith and common life. So I think that that's part of our responsibility as leaders, to help people think through faithfully, and that we're not telling people what to do, but we're helping them think through what are the moral implications of public policies.
Thank you.
I think one of the things, I'm a retired clergy, I think one of the things is that there are a lot of faith-based folks in this room would never feel comfortable getting up and telling the people in your house of worship who to vote for. And that's what this allows, and it's already happening. We know it's already happening. The dark money is already happening. But I can't imagine what would happen if I told my congregation who to vote for. I think half of them would go vote the opposite way just to show me that.
All right, thank you. Standing up in the back.
No, actually it's sort of a three-part individual, each person question. Let's see, the Jewish brother. Now that Jerusalem is now part of Israel, and the indecision that it took it to get that, and involved a lot of politics to get it there, is that political hand still going to stay in Israel? Or do you think that political hand being in Israel is going to continue to affect us here? The Islamic brother, as far as the caliphate, I know that the Islam and the Muslims separated because of who was the true caliph. That's correct, right?
Say what now? I couldn't understand.
Islam and the Muslim Brotherhood separated because they couldn't agree on who the true caliphate was, right?
Well, the major schism that came after the Prophet was who was going to be the next leader of the, which was called the Caliph.
Right.
All right. And so the argument was that Ali, the Prophet's cousin, should have been it instead of Abu Bakr Siddiq.
Right, which was about a marriage.
Yeah,
right?
but you know, I don't know if is that what you want?
No, I just wanted to, before I asked the question, I wanted to confirm.
Right.
So it was about a marriage that was not confirmed, and so they split, right? So with the political stance the way it still is between Muslims and Islams, how are we going to be able to be sure that Islamic State is not going to keep perpetuating religion by force and as well as using money?
I worry this question might be a little bit outside the scope of the conversation here. Do you have any questions specifically about the interaction between the state and religion in the United States?
Right. All of those things that happen, they affect us here, which is why I'm trying to get sort of an understanding, especially from the leaders of those denominations, on how are they discussing that in their churches, on how it's affecting us here in the United States.
Okay, so what's the question?
Never mind.
Okay.
I will save my questions for deeper letters of understanding. My name is Stephanie Augustine. I'll be contacting you later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
But the first question was.
Okay, well, let's go back to sort of in a broader sense of, I suppose, interaction between advocacy for Israel and Jewish religion as it's practiced here in America. You know, how do you find a proper balance?
Well, we see Israel as an ally of the United States and as an important ally of the United States in terms of sharing national security information, intelligence information, constructing other kinds of technologies. And so we believe that it's an important relationship to develop and maintain.
May I follow up on that question? I believe the question that she was asking, and I heard your answer,
is the decision to make Jerusalem as moving the U.S. Council there is political.
Yes.
And if it's political, the only basis for that decision is rooted in the religious side.
Thank you.
Isn't that the question?
Exactly.
Well, first of all, Jerusalem, as far as I know, Israel is perhaps, as far as I know, the only country in the world who has not been allowed to determine what the capital is. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. That's where the government is. That's where the Knesset is, the Supreme Court building. All the governmental offices are in Jerusalem. The fact that all the consulates are in Tel Aviv is a decision of the other countries of the world. But when they want to do business in Israel, they go to Jerusalem because that's where the government is. Putting the embassy in the west side, the western part of Jerusalem, which was the capital of Israel since 1948, shouldn't affect the determination of the borders of the country or the status of the old city of Jerusalem or the other issues, which even Trump said himself, and the State Department spokesperson after he made the statement also reiterated. The fact that some countries are now deciding to put their embassies in the capital of the country, like every other country has in the world, shouldn't be necessarily a big, I mean, I realize it's political, the timing of it was political, there's a lot of issues involved in that. Some people may not like because it happened under the Trump presidency, or the timing of it, whatever, but it is the capital of the country.
All right, thank you. Well, I hope we just, keep it in question format. We're doing Q&A.
I'm going to try my best. Is it in fact a matter of faith or a matter of politics that the government of the United States decided to change the location of the American embassy in Israel?
Well, again, look, you can leave the religious issue outside, I think, and just as a matter of governmental policy, Israel considers the capital of its country Jerusalem. That's where all the government institutions are, right? So even if you take religion out of the issue, that's where Israel considers its capital.
Why is this a referendum on the issues between Israel and all of this other stuff? We're here to talk about separation of church and state.
Okay, let's move on to a few other questions. Let's keep it on topic. All right. What about from Nancy?
I have a question. In my opening remarks, I alluded to a lawsuit that has recently been filed here in Houston over houses of worship that were damaged in the hurricane that wanted the government to fund their rebuilding process. And I would be interested to know what y'all think of that because, again, for many years, FEMA, as a government agent that made federal funds available for disaster relief, had a policy they would not give government money to fund activities in a house of worship that were purely religious, as opposed to activities that could be used to fund the food pantry or that sort of thing. So that was the change in this policy. I'd like to think of reaction to talk about it.
What I heard recently was the decision that an institution, let's say a Salvation Army, that's giving food to hungry people, and then they also have in the same room at the same time somebody who's proselytizing, right? That they wouldn't have to stop that activity as part of giving the food. And I personally find that problematic. I mean, the fact that they may have proselytizing going on in another room would not bother me. In other words, they're doing a public function, they're feeding the hungry people, and if they're getting money for doing that, I mean, we do that in a lot of other faith-based institutions around the country. I was just at a Jewish Family Service program. They offer counseling services and financial aid and other kinds of services to the public. They take some public money, I believe, for doing those activities. And I And as a result of that, they offer their services to people outside the Jewish community. They're open, they have an open door policy. Anybody can come in and get services. And that's the way it should be, right? If you're going to take public money, you have to be open to anybody.
I agree with what the rabbi has said. I think worship activities are exercises of religion. And I don't think that the tax dollars need to be supporting prayer. I think that that's a function of faith that's distinct from common good activities that benefit the whole community. And so I do think that it's not right to exclude a church or religious house of worship who's offering those kind of resources to the community at large from access to tax dollars for the parts of the building that are working on that kind of good.
I don't think I can add too much to that. I agree. You know, the services for the common good are fine, but whenever you get into building a church or building a mosque or rebuilding, those things get to be really sticky. I mean, that can be interpreted different. Or even supporting a certain religious denomination. But the common issues about helping the children read or whatever, and it's open to the public, that's okay.
Can I ask y'all to explain why this lady asked her question, and she heard y'all say, believe in this or support that, but she didn't quite get why. I would like y'all to explain what's wrong with what, as a leader of a house of worship, Reverend, if your church were to be damaged by a hurricane, it would seem to some people that you would love to get government assistance to rebuild your church's sanctuary. Why would you be reluctant?
I've actually had that experience. My nave was destroyed by a tornado, our house of worship, and our parish hall was left standing. I don't want the government telling me what to do in my house of prayer. Who can be there, how we can worship, what we need to be able to do. I think that a weirdness of this regulation is that I also don't have, people of faith do not have to have handicap access in their buildings, and we're precluded. We don't have to be we don't have to make revisions to our buildings to do public accommodations. That's the other thing that the public buildings are actually more accessible with. That's the way the current law would have it structured. I'm being inarticulate about this. I think that the reason that is important is that I don't think it's just me personally. I think once you allow the government to tell you how to exercise your faith, the government is defining your faith in a fundamental way. And I think one of the reasons that religion has been vital in the United States is that the government does not tell us how to do that. We have to fund that on our own. So if you look around the world, in terms of participation, volunteering, giving, education, religious life in America is still robust, even though many of the Christian adherents are very nervous about fear because of rising secularism. If you look at how we are compared to other countries, that volunteer spirit, that funding of it, that lack of establishment has really led to a lot of creativity and innovation around common good issues that can come out of that freedom. So I think that that imposition structurally inhibits our practice and our innovation and our volunteerism. And I think it would just weaken religious life ultimately.
Is this a question to?
There's no tax exemption, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Was it Johnson?
Well, with the Johnson Amendment, you can't advocate for a candidate. Without the Johnson Amendment, you can advocate for it, but you're still tax exempt.
So nothing changes.
Nothing, no, that's the whole point, right?
Okay, do we have any other questions?
I'm sorry to ask again, but have there been examples, say in Texas, of enforcement of the Johnson Amendment?
That's a good question.
That lost their tax exempt status before?
I don't think so.
We were talking about this earlier, and we were trying to think of an instance, and we couldn't off the top of our heads, but I bet if we did some research, we could find something. I think Paul might be raising his hand.
I don't know about Texas. There are two cases which, in effect, disestablished or took away the tax exemptions of religious institutions. The two minor cases somewhere in the United States. So it's out there and it's meaningful. But basically, if you look at what actually happens in real life, this particular law is what did Shakespeare say about the breach of the observance? A lot goes on, but if the IRS was enforcing this, we'd have a lot of problems.
So actually, that wouldn't change that much. The administration saying there's no enforcement, there's really no change in practice, if no one's ever enforced this before.
Well, Matt, do you have a thought?
I have a kind of related to what you said. So my view of why people on the right want the Johnson Amendment to be thrown out is far more cynical, I think, than what people have been talking about. And my view is that what they want is a mechanism whereby people can give money to a church. And for the record, it's very easy to found a church, at least for tax purposes. I'm sorry, at least for tax purposes. You can found a church based upon anything you want. It's very hard for the government to question that. But when you're talking about giving money to a church, that money is not only tax exempt for you, but the church doesn't have to tell anybody who gave them the money. And they don't have to disclose their source of revenue. They don't have to tell who they're giving the money to. So, there are obvious people in America that love that. You think of the Koch brothers, you talk about George Soros, somebody on the left who throws a lot of money around in politics, being able to completely disguise the money that they're throwing around. But one of the things that I fear even more than that is that it would open it up for foreign nationals and foreign governments to start donating money. Right now, you're not allowed as a candidate for political office to accept money from a foreign national or a foreign government. It's illegal. But you could easily disguise that if you wanted to give that money to somebody to give to a church. You could launder it enough and it could just go to whichever candidate you wanted it to go to. And so your point is well taken, and Paul talked about that too. The amendment is not enforced. It's a toothless tiger.
Can I just say this, Matt? It's not a question of it not being enforced. The reason that it hasn't been enforced is that most churches and ministers abide by it because it's on the books, so that we can't say that if it's that change, that the practice wouldn't change, or that parishioners would put pressure on their own clergymen to be endorsing candidates.
That's a point well taken. My fear about it is that it's really not about the politics, it's more about the money.
But it seems like the issue is that if you talk about the Johnson Amendment in a good faith way, you're questioning, well, do these religious figures have the ability to say what they want to say? People are concerned that they feel like the government's telling them they can't do. But what Paul seems to be bringing up is that religious leaders more or less say or do whatever they want all the time. And I think our panel here would attest to that. The question is whether or not they can raise money and use that money. And getting rid of the Johnson Amendment would create this new avenue for political activism with the tax exemption of a religious institution. You're kind of creating some sort of tax code monster through which you could funnel money for religious purposes. And that's the real concern here. Question in the back?
I would ask whether Because we would actually challenge Justin over in West.
Has anyone challenged it? Does anyone know if it's faced a judicial challenge? Paul? No? No? No, it hasn't. Seems like it's a legislative question. Okay.
There's an organization that has been encouraging ministers for many years to openly violate it. I think they call it Pulpit Sunday or something like that. Because Pulpit Sunday or something, they're looking for a lawsuit to be brought. They're looking for the government to prosecute one of these pastors who violates the law. So in that sense, they're trying to provoke a lawsuit, but there hasn't been one yet.
It is helpful for pastors from the Johnson Amendment in order to keep your congregation from partisan politics and ripping the congregation apart. Because you can always say, we can't do that because we'll lose our tax.
That's the point. That's the point.
There's another twist to this is that I had heard of a rumor, at least, that the Johnson Amendment was targeting black churches who were actually promoting civil rights legislation. That's a rumor. I don't know how true that is, but I thought it was really strange. Now, this is in 54 with Brown versus Board of Education, too. But it's a rumor. I don't know how.
It didn't happen. The issues have always been able to be talked about at churches.
Yeah.
But partisan and candidates not ever.
Yeah.
We've got time for about one more question if anyone is out there. Otherwise, I want to thank you all for coming. Thank our wonderful panel.
I want to thank the panel too, and the moderator. This was really an interesting program, and also thank the audience. I want to thank y'all with also not just our verbal thanks, but I'd like to give each one of you two things. One is a one-year membership in Americans United. I hope you'll appreciate. And two is a copy of this book. Rob Boston, who is our Director of Communications, wrote this book called Taking Liberties, Why Religious Freedom Doesn't Give You the Right to Tell Other People What to Do. So I'm going to give this a copy to each of you. Thanks for participating. Now, there are a lot of questions tonight, great questions about the Johnson Amendment. So what I encourage you to do is a couple of things. Again, come up, approach us tonight, and one of us board members, email us, ask us your questions, or better yet, invite us to speak to your group where we can get into this topic in more detail. I'm opinionated too, and I like to talk a lot, and I was kind of biting my tongue because I did have answers to some of the questions, but of course I wasn't one of the featured speakers tonight. But if you want to invite me to talk to your group, I'll be happy to answer those questions. So please stay with us, interact, as I said, learn, share, give, and act. And thanks very much for coming tonight. You're welcome to stay and partake of the receptions or just talk to other people. Bye.